Great. I think everyone's in now, so we will get started. So, good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us this evening for another Restless event with our partners, My Menopause Centre. And this evening, we are looking at additions and alternatives to HRT. So, before I hand over to Helen, who'll chair this evening's event, I want to remind everyone to please post questions and thoughts in the chat function at the bottom of your screens, and feel free to do this throughout the event. There'll also be time for questions at the end. The event will run for about an hour, and we are recording it, so it'll be mailed to everybody who's registered for this evening. So I'll hand over now to Helen O'Moyle, who's co-founder of My Menopause Centre. Over to you, Helen.
Aideen, good evening. Thank you. Thank you very much for that warm introduction, and good evening, everyone. It is great to see you all here on this, certainly if you're in the UK or Ireland, cold, wet autumn stroke winter's evening. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out to learn about ways to improve your health and well-being. Dr. Clare and I are really delighted that so many of you have registered for and are joining us for tonight's important conversation. When it comes to managing menopause symptoms, for most women, most of the time, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is one of the most effective ways of doing so, and it has many well-documented long-term protective health benefits as well. In October, we ran 2 free events where we went back to basics on HRT, and we've previously run events looking at lifestyle, in particular nutrition, diet, and exercise, because these are, of course, the building blocks for good health. Now, the recordings of these events and related articles and blogs are on our website, and I'll post links to them in a moment. But what if HRT isn't an option for you, or if it hasn't suited you? Or what if you find that while it's really helpful, it's not quite enough to help you feel like you again, and you want to bolster it with something else, or you may prefer to navigate the menopause transition naturally? A question we get so often then is, what are the additions and alternatives to HRT? And that's what we're going to focus on tonight, as Aideen said. We're going to look at prescribable alternatives, which Dr. Clare will cover in the second part of our webinar. And in the first part, we're going to look at herbal alternatives and supplements and the evidence for each. As Aideen said, your questions are very welcome. Pop them into the chat and we'll cover as many as we can. But please remember that we're not permitted to provide any personal medical advice within this session, but can, of course, comment on general questions. And please also remember that you should always talk to your medical professional before acting on any information provided. And we already have our first question, and thank you, Emma, and we'll come to that then. As Aideen said, the webinar is being recorded. We'll share later, and we'll share any of the links that we put in the chat too. So before we start, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our panelists, Dr. Clare Spencer and Melinda McDougall. Dr. Clare, as many of you will know, is my friend and co-founder at My Menopause Centre, and she's an expert in women's health and the menopause. She qualified from Cambridge University and holds membership of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and membership of the Royal College of General Practitioners. She's also a member of the British Menopause Society and the British Menopause Society's Medical Advisory Committee, and she is a British Menopause Society trainer. So I can honestly say you couldn't be in better hands than with Dr. Clare. Now, Melinda, we're delighted that Melinda is joining us this evening. She's a registered medical herbalist and a former vice president of the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. Melinda specializes in natural menopause support and runs a busy online clinic where she sees women from across the UK and beyond. She, thankfully, on our behalf, has analysed hundreds of research papers to find out what really works and translate this into clinical practice. And this is so important because there is a bewildering amount of information out there about supplements, and some of it is frankly quite bogus. So Melinda is going to steer us through all of the noise that's out there and guide us to the safe waters of effective natural remedies. She sees all women at all stages of the menopause transition, whether they're taking HRT or not, and she's a special interest in supporting women recovering from breast cancer. She takes a very holistic view of menopause and is an advocate, and here for this, of positive aging. So thank you, Melinda. We really appreciate you spending the time. And I know when Dr. Clare saw you speak at the British Menopause Society conference earlier this year, she was so impressed by what you had to say that she said, Helen, we've got to get Melinda onto a webinar with us. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. So you're going to help us navigate this very confusing world. And before we do so, and before we dive in, it would be super helpful if you could help us to step back and distinguish and help us to understand what's meant by herbal medicine and how it differs from supplements, because often we use the two words interchangeably.
Thanks so much, Helen and Claire. And it's really lovely to be here with you all this evening. And I'd just really like to welcome you all, no matter what angle you might be approaching this from. You know, as Helen said, you know, you might be using hormone therapy, but you might still have a few symptoms that you'd like to get on top of. Maybe hormone therapy didn't suit you. Maybe you can't take it for medical reasons, or you choose not to. And, you know, the latest statistics actually tell us that just 20% of women, menopausal women in the UK, are using hormone therapy. So it might not feel like that sometimes, but if you're in that 80% of, you know, not using hormone therapy, you know, you're not alone. And as a medical herbalist, you know, I support women coming at this from all of those different angles. So when we talk about herbal medicine, it's, you know, it is important to distinguish it from, you know, other types of supplements. So women have used herbal medicine to manage the menopause transition for hundreds of years. But thanks to scientific research, we now know much more about how these plants interact with our bodies and why they might be an effective option to help manage our menopausal symptoms. And it can be really powerful stuff. You know, I've helped women with extreme menopausal symptoms to feel better just with herbal medicine and a holistic approach, which is really important. So when we talk about herbal medicine, you know, let's have a think about what that means. So it's different to homeopathy, and herbal medicine is the use of whole plants to treat illness. So we wouldn't be here as a species, as humans, if it wasn't for herbal medicine, because our ancestors just wouldn't have survived. And it comes in many different forms. So you might see powders, you know, that you add into your smoothies. You might see capsules, herbal teas. Don't ever underestimate the power of a good cup of herbal tea. Tablets, tinctures or liquid extracts, which I use a lot of. And then you also have high strength herbal supplements. But it's important to remember that these high strength supplements are often using just one active chemical from a plant, because plants can contain hundreds of chemicals. And that's why I like working with whole plants. So when we talk about supplements, where you know, you can refer to herbal medicines as supplements, but we're also talking about vitamins and minerals, which can also be useful in menopause. And vitamins and minerals aren't herbal medicine, but you sometimes find supplements that blend herbs and vitamins and minerals together. So my favorite way of working with herbal medicines is in liquid form, or tinctures, as they're also called, because this is a really potent and bioavailable way of absorbing the plant chemicals into our bodies. And you only need a tiny dose for it to be effective. So a tiny dose of a liquid herb is an equivalent of handfuls of capsules. You know, so they're quite cost effective and very potent and effective. And not everyone likes popping pills and tablets. A lot of my patients find it really boring, and it's also really expensive. And just before we dive into all the different herbs and supplements, I just wanted to say that it's important to remember that there's no silver bullet. There's no one herb or supplement or type of hormone therapy that will work for everybody. So everyone's menopausal symptoms are really different, and a holistic approach, including dietary and lifestyle changes, is really essential to get on top of menopausal symptoms.
Yeah, Melinda, you're so right. That point about sadly no silver bullet. If only there was one, we'd all be retired in our islands in Mauritius, wouldn't we? But recognizing that finding out what's right for you is the thing that's important, but building on a foundation of good health. And thank you for that explanation of the difference between, you know, herbal supplements and supplements, or herbal medicines, and also just the importance of how you take it and the potency of the more liquid form. And I'm definitely going to come back to that, because I know it's something that you do in your practice. And I've got lots of questions about your approach to that. But before we come to that, you know, we often think that when we see something on the shelf and it's called herbal, we assume that it's safe. If it's from a herb, if it's herbal, if it's from a plant, it must be safe. Is that correct? Are we right to think that? Or are some supplements not, or herbal remedies not suitable for some people?
So herbal medicines are generally safe, but there are a few caveats. So many women use herbal medicine and supplements as the first line treatment for menopause before they try any other options. So they are generally safe, but you need to know what you're doing, and you should seek professional advice if you're taking prescription medication, if you have other health conditions. So if you have, for example, high blood pressure or diabetes, for example, or a thyroid condition, or if you have a history of hormone sensitive cancer. And a bit later in this talk, I'll explain what to look for when you're looking for a good supplement, because they're not all created equal.
Excellent, thank you. So some sensible advice there about things to watch out for, and we'll dig a little bit more into that in a moment. So now the $60 million question though, based on your experience and having, done all of that research and reviewed all the papers out there, which supplements do you recommend, or do you know, based on what you've seen, are effective in managing menopause symptoms, Melinda?
So this is a vast subject, and just to give you an idea, I have got 100 different herbal medicines in my dispensary that I use in clinical practice. We're not going to talk about 100 different herbs tonight, though. So we've broken this down into 3 different categories for you to make things a bit easier. So the first category is herbs and supplements that have a mild hormonal effect. So these are the most similar to hormone therapy. The second category is herbs and supplements to support mental health and your nervous system, which I think you'll all agree is really important during menopause. And then also herbs and supplements that are effective for symptom management, but don't have any hormonal activity.
Very good. So under that umbrella then, for each one, if we start off with the first category that you mentioned, those containing phytohormones, then if you could build that out for us and talk about the different ones that can help. And in particular, and you've got a great guide, and I'll add the link to it on your website, that I would recommend that everybody downloads, because it explains very simply which herbal remedies and supplements for which symptoms. Because already I can see in the chat, we've got questions about vaginal dryness, we've got questions around hot flushes, we've got lots of questions about Veosa, which Claire will come to later. But thinking about it holistically, when we think about phytohormones, Melinda, which ones would you recommend as helping people?
So when we talk about these phytohormones, so phyto means plant. So a lot of these plants used to be termed as phytoestrogens, so plant estrogens. And this kind of blows my mind that there are plants that have molecules that have a very similar structure to our own human estrogen structure in our bodies, and that these plant molecules actually bind to our estrogen receptors. And that just shows that we've evolved alongside plants for hundreds of years. But rather than calling them phytoestrogens anymore, researchers are starting to rebrand them as phytoserms. So that's SERM, phytoserms. And that stands for selective estrogen receptor modulators. And the E is the American spelling for estrogen. And the reason they've rebranded them is because these plants work in such really interesting ways in our bodies. They can modulate the levels of estrogen we have in our body. So if you have too much estrogen, as you would see in perimenopause, it can level out the estrogen and bring it down a bit. Or if your estrogen levels are quite low, it can give you a mild boost. They're not as strong as hormone therapy. But due to their hormonal activity, some of these herbs and supplements are currently not recommended if you have had hormone sensitive cancer. Although I think that advice is going to start changing in the next few years as more and more research comes through. I'm not going to get too technical about this tonight, but we have two different types of estrogen receptors in our bodies. And one of those types of receptors is known to drive cancer, where the other type of receptor down-regulates or can be protective against cancer. And we're finding out that a lot of these so-called phytoestrogens, but now called phytoserms, are actually really protective against cancer. But we're still being cautious at the moment, but I'm hoping that's going to change. So let's dive into some of these supplements and herbs. So the first one is soy. So many of you will know about soy and will have heard of its benefits for menopausal symptoms. It contains isoflavones, which are a powerful phytoserm. And it is really well studied for a wide range of menopausal symptoms. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies on this plant. And it can be also really beneficial for bone and heart health. So if you are not taking HRT and you want to look after your bones, then soy is a really good one for you. And when it's consumed as a whole food, so if you have lots of edamame beans, tofu, or organic soy milk, soy is not going to increase your risk of cancer. And studies are increasingly showing that it may be protective. So if you've had estrogen sensitive cancer, you can consume soy as a food. Isoflavones that are in soy interact with your microbiome, and fermented soy products such as miso, tempeh, and tamari may be better absorbed by the body than just edamame beans and tofu that aren't fermented, because of that microbiome interaction that's needed for the isoflavones to work. So if you have estrogen sensitive cancer, just be a bit more wary of the high strength isoflavone supplements that you see in the market. Because as I said before, they're taking one active constituent out of that plant and then they're magnifying it and turning it into a really high strength supplement, which can be useful for menopausal symptoms, but be a bit wary of it if you have estrogen positive cancer. And soy may interact with thyroxine if you have a thyroid condition. The next one is red clover. So again, it's an excellent source of isoflavones, and it's a phytoserm as well. Its isoflavones seem to be more concentrated and more effective in the short term than those from soy. A combination of soy and red clover can be very useful. I've always felt a little bit disappointed by red clover, I have to be honest, in my practice. I've read loads and loads of studies about it, and then I started using it with my patients, and I didn't really see very good results for menopausal symptoms. And I dug a bit further into this, and the reason for that is because you need a certain type of microbiome for the red clover to work, for the isoflavones to work. So it's not going to work for everybody because the isoflavones need to be converted into an active form in your gut. So this is why we're starting to see more fermented red clover products come out on the market. So, not one of my favorites, I have to say, but you see a lot of those red clover menopause products out there. And it might interact with anticoagulants if you are taking those. One of my favorite herbs, though, is sage, and that is another phytoserm. And it's really good for hot flushes, night sweats, and it also improves memory. You can take it as a tea. A kind of quite a famous way of taking sage for menopause is as a cold tea, which it doesn't sound that appetizing, but it's quite good if you just need to cool everything down. But I also use it a lot as a tincture, and you often see sage in menopause supplements. And it can interact with diabetic medications, epileptic medications, or any sort of strong sedatives. So just be mindful of that. One of the other phytohormonal type herbs we should be looking at is also flax seeds. I take flax seeds every single day. And clinical studies have demonstrated that the lignans in flax seeds are really protective against hormonal cancers. And it's also high in omega-3 and fiber, so really good for all of, your general health. And a couple of other ones, shatavari, which is an Ayurvedic herb or an Indian herb. It's got a nickname, She Who Has 100 Husbands. I'm
If
not
she
sure.
ever had the patience.
I don't think anyone really wants 100 husbands, but it gives you an idea of how valued this herb is in India as a female tonic. It's really good for hot flushes and vaginal dryness, can reduce anxiety, and it's also an adaptogen, so it helps our bodies adapt to stress. And you can actually get shatavari powder and put that in your smoothie. And you see it in a lot of menopausal supplements. So that's also another one of my favorites.
So sorry, Melinda, I'm so
Yeah.
pleased that you mentioned vaginal dryness, because
Yeah.
it's not often one that gets called out when we talk about herbal medicines or supplements. And it was a specific question from somebody in the audience tonight, and I know Claire will pick that up maybe when we come to prescribable alternatives, maybe talk about things that can help with vaginal dryness too, Claire. But that's the first time, to be honest, Melinda, that I've heard about shatavari helping with vaginal dryness too.
Yeah, it's really good. And there's another supplement I'll talk about as well, which is good for vaginal dryness. And just to finish off this section, Agnus castus is not a phytoserm. It actually works on our progesterone pathways in our body. And this is one of my favorite herbs for helping regulate the erratic menstrual cycles that you see in perimenopause and reducing the intensity of your PMS symptoms. So it's also known as Vitex, and chaste tree is another word for it. And it just stops that horrible cycle you get into where you have your period every 2 weeks, as you sort of get into the later stages of perimenopause. So that's another really good one. So they're all my hormonal herbs that I work with.
Excellent. That is very clear. And I really appreciate you calling out where they can help, but where you need to be careful if you have suffer from particular conditions or are taking other certain types of medication. So, Melinda, we've also spoken about, as we prepared for tonight's session, about the supplements and herbal remedies that can help with mood-related symptoms. And obviously, mood-related symptoms, anxiety, depression, can so often, unfortunately, come with menopause as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and recommendations on the things that can help on that front.
Absolutely. This is such an important part of menopause treatments, treating the sort of mental well-being side of things. And I'm going to whiz through a few of these herbs, but don't worry if you don't get them all, because they're all in my free download that you can look at later. So the first one, very famously, is St. John's wort. Very well studied, and very well studied for menopause as well. Really good for anxiety and low mood. And it can also help with hot flushes when it's combined with black cohosh. And although it is an incredibly effective herbal medicine, you can take it in many different forms, it can interact with many pharmaceutical drugs, including hormone therapy. So if you're taking hormone therapy, don't take St. John's wort. And you tend to avoid it if you're on any other kind of medication. But it's a really useful herb in menopause, especially when you get into those dark winter days and you're feeling a bit low. It's really known as the sunshine herb. One of my favorites for menopausal anxiety is a herb that nobody has ever really heard of. Nobody ever seems to have heard of it. And it's called blue skullcap. And it's really brilliant for easing menopausal anxiety and helping you to feel less overwhelmed. It connects with our GABA receptors, and it induces a calming effect in our bodies. And you can take that if you're on antidepressants. And you can take it as a tea or a tincture. I've not seen it in supplement form, so not as a capsule or a powder or anything like that, but it's one I use a lot of. Then I saw someone asking about sleep. Valerian and passion flower are my two favorites for menopausal insomnia. So really soothing sedative herbs that induce feelings of calm. And there's lots of research into valerian looking at the benefits for insomnia, and it actually has a positive impact on sleep wave patterns. So it actually gives you a better quality of sleep, and you won't wake up feeling groggy in the morning as you often do from a lot of sleeping pills. So that's a really good combo for sleep. Maca root is another one that I think a lot of you will have heard of. It's often sold in powder form and people put it in their smoothies. And it's one of another one of my favorites, a really good all-rounder. So they call this Peruvian ginseng because it comes from Peru, and it gives you a bit of a kick like ginseng. It's a wonderful tonic plant, and it boosts your mood and energy and libido, which can take a bit of a nosedive during menopause. And it's also high in iron. So that's another really good one from me. It's not a hormonal herb, but it may indirectly increase your estrogen levels. So if you have an estrogen sensitive condition, you should be a little bit wary of that one. And then just finishing off with two of my favorite adaptogens. So adaptogens help our bodies adapt to stress. And in menopause, we are so stressed, for all sorts of reasons. We're in that kind of midlife, crush, aren't we? And we need adaptogens. And this is where I think HRT just can't quite touch these pieces. So if you're taking HRT, you're still feeling really stressed and anxious and you're not sleeping well, try some ashwagandha. It's a really powerful adaptogen that is very calming. It reduces your stress and anxiety, promotes healthy sleep, and it also modulates your cortisol levels, which are our stress hormones. But avoid it if you have an overactive thyroid, are taking strong sedatives or anticonvulsant medication. And then rhodiola is the other adaptogen. Sorry.
Melinda, may I ask you a quick question about ashwagandha? Because we've got a great question. We've had lots of great questions. I'm just pulling out the ones that tie into what you're speaking about. Is a question here, and thank you for the question, Anna. Is it safe to take it if you're taking HRT? Can you take it with it as an addition?
Ashwagandha, absolutely, you can. Yeah, it's a good one. It's a really good one just to sort of top up your HRT where your HRT can't quite help you with modulating your stress response. I know that there is research showing that estrogen that's in HRT can help to also modulate your stress response, but your cortisol levels. But ashwagandha is a fantastic one. I put it in a lot of my menopause prescriptions.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry for interrupting the flow.
That's all right. And rhodiola is just the last one on this list. So again, a really powerful adaptogen. And this is good for energy, mood, cognitive function, and memory. And it's also cardioprotective, so good for your heart. And we know that our hearts become a bit more vulnerable after menopause. And it's not hormonal. It's safe if you have an estrogen sensitive condition, but it might interact with some antidepressants or blood pressure medication.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I know we're already halfway through our webinar. We have so many great questions coming in. But before we come back to some more general questions about how to take supplements and and different herbal remedies, what about herbal medicine and supplements that don't show any phytohormonal activity? So what would you recommend? And then, as we discussed at the top, these can be absolutely taken safely by women with hormone-related cancer history.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of these are in my download if you miss, if I'm going too fast. But one of my favorite menopausal herbs is black cohosh. And, you know, this herb has been really misunderstood. So it's no longer classed as a phytoestrogen. We used to think it had estrogenic activity, but all the latest research is saying that that is not the case, that it actually works on neurotransmitters, our neurotransmitter pathways. And these are the same neurotransmitters that cause hot flushes, that are implicated in creating hot flushes. So if someone comes to me with hot flushes and night sweats, black cohosh is going to be my #1 herb for that. And give it, 10 to 14 days to for it to be effective. It might work a lot sooner than that. And it also reduces anxiety. It's anti-inflammatory. It's really good for joint pain. It's safe if you have had an estrogen positive cancer. So it's a really good all-rounder, black cohosh. So I really recommend that one, but we'll talk a bit more later about how to source a good one. Omega-3 is an essential supplement as you age, for brain health, joint health, heart health. It's again highly anti-inflammatory. It's a really good one if you have had cancer. And it's also found in many food forms like oily fish and eggs and flaxseed. And you obviously get it in supplement form. Vitamin D, again, essential for healthy bones, and add some K2 into that supplement. Nearly everyone in the UK is deficient in vitamin D due to all the dark winter months we live through. Then we have magnesium. Magnesium's a great one as we go through menopause. It can help with sleep, anxiety, low mood, hormone balance, muscle aches. It calms down our nervous system. And if you're, looking at taking magnesium for those reasons, then you want to take magnesium glycinate. And it's safe to take for everyone. And then going back to vaginal dryness, sea buckthorn oil. So that's SEA, sea buckthorn oil, is a little orange berry that grows all over the UK, and it comes in capsule form, contains omega-7 fatty acids, and it's really good for all that menopausal dryness that we get. And a couple of other ones I use for brain fog are ginkgo and gotu kola. So they help mental focus, clears your brain fog, and, just help you feel a bit more on it, as you go through menopause. And just finally, for those really heavy periods that you get as you go into the later stages of perimenopause, I've got a really good combination of herbs that I use to really stop that flooding and that really heavy bleeding. And those are lady's mantle, yarrow, nettle, and shepherd's purse. And I mix them together as a tea, and it really does stop all of that horrible flooding that you get. And obviously you need some iron as well, if that is happening to you. And I should also say, if you are having lots of heavy menstrual bleeding, then you also need to just make sure you're ruling out fibroids or any other sort of malignant causes for that bleeding. So they are some of my other mainstays of herbs and supplements that I use constantly in my clinic.
Well, that's amazing. That's really, really clear. And I put in a link to your website, Melinda, and there's a link on your website then to the supplement guide that you've got in there, so which is great information, really helpful information in there. Now, when you go into any health shop or pharmacy or supermarket, you're confronted with a vast array of different brands and often at vastly different price points. So again, another question we often get is, how can you tell if you pay more, are you getting better quality? So what things should we keep in mind when we stand in front of that shelf? And are there any particular brands that you would recommend as well?
Absolutely. So this is the $1 million question, isn't it? So you do get what you pay for. So a lot of the cheaper supplements that you see in sort of, you know, Boots, Superdrug, Holland & Barrett, places like that, they will be less effective. They will have lots of fillers that aren't very good for you in them. And they, you know, they may not have, if they've got herbal medicines in them, they may not have very high levels of the herbs in them, so they may not be very effective. So you do want to look at the sort of mid-range of supplements, because there are also some really expensive supplements out there, like ridiculously expensive, and they are also, you know, ineffective in my view, or not doing what they claim to do. So don't spend loads of money and don't spend next to no money. So in the middle, we have a good range of herbal medicine supplements, and also vitamins and minerals as well. So do your research, you know, always look at the ingredients list, you know, see what's in those supplements. I was looking at a supplement, somebody was showing me a multivitamin from Boots the other day, and it actually listed talc as one of the ingredients. And there's more and more research on talc, looking at it as a, you know, suspected carcinogen. You know, there's lots of fillers, and there's also very inactive things in a lot of these cheap supplements. So things like magnesium oxide, which just doesn't really do much in the body. You know, there's just, yeah, a lot of fillers, we call them, in those supplements that aren't very good for you. So there's a lot of things that determine what is a good supplement and what isn't a good supplement. So, you know, has there been any research done on the supplement that you're choosing? You know, what kind of manufacturing process has it been through? Has it been through any sort of registration process? What's the quality of the raw materials in those supplements? If you're looking at herbal medicine supplements, then a really good place to start is to look for the THR logo. So that means traditional herbal registration. And that's a good place to start if you're looking at a herbal medicine supplement, because it means it's been through a really good process. So in terms of recommendations of some of the supplements that I use a lot in my clinic, I mean, I prescribe a lot of different supplements, but some of the brands I work with are Pure Encapsulations, Wild Nutrition, Nutri-Advanced, Cytoplan, BioCare, Dr. Vegan, Bare Biology. They do a really good omega-3 supplement. Kiki Health, Viridian, and In Vivo also do some really good supplements. And if you're looking at herbal medicines, then there are a couple of places you can go to source, you know, whole plants. So there's Baldwin's in London, they have an online shop. Napier's in Scotland, they also have an online shop, and they both have really good herbs and herbal medicines. And also Indigo Herbs, who are in Somerset, and they have an online shop as well. So they have lots of lovely herbs and whole, you know, bags of tea and powders and things like that. So there's lots to talk about, there's lots to choose from, but that's a sort of whistle stop tour through some of the herbs and supplements that I use in my clinic.
Oh, look, that's fantastic. It's really helpful. And I've pasted in those brands into the chat as well, in case people didn't get a chance to catch them all. And then there's obviously the approach that you take in your clinic, and we'll come back to that. But I wonder if, Melinda, you'll have seen we have lots of questions for you in the chat. I wonder if you could take a look at them. And while you're looking at them, I'm going to switch gears and we'll chat to Dr. Clare now about prescribable alternatives, and then we'll come back to the questions. But that was a fantastic overview, Melinda, of the, you know, evidence base for herbal supplements, herbal remedies and supplements that can help with menopause symptoms. And I think you've really given us a North Star to help orientate us and think about the ones that we can look for and that will actually help us and that are worth spending the money on and that we can try. And Claire, Thank you I know you were as fascinated as the conversation tonight, I'd say, as you were the first time you heard it at the BMS conference. But you'll have seen we've had lots of questions for you in the chat as well. So if we could maybe pick those up as we switch gears and talk about prescribable alternatives. But I wonder if we could maybe start with, we have had lots of questions about Veosa, and I wonder, Claire, if you could just tell us about, for those that aren't familiar with it, what it is. Some mention it by the name of the active ingredient, but what the status of prescribing it is in the UK. And I know you've prescribed it as well to patients privately in our clinic, what your experience of it is and what their experience of it is.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Melinda. That was fascinating as ever. Yeah, so Veosa is the brand name for fezolinetant, and this is a neurokinin 3 antagonist. And basically, it's a chemical that works directly on the temperature regulation bit of your brain. And it's got a license for moderate to severe vasomotor symptoms, so hot flushes and night sweats. It hasn't yet been approved by NICE, that's the National Institute for Clinical and Healthcare Excellence. And so that's why it wasn't, unfortunately, included in the NICE guideline that was published a couple of weeks ago in the updated version. But I know that consultations are underway, and I'm hoping, although we haven't got a date yet, I'm hoping it will be approved next year. So it's a tablet that you take every single day. It is available in the UK, but unfortunately it's only available privately. And depending on the pharmacy that you use, it's anywhere between 60 and 85 pounds a month. So it isn't cheap. It seems to be really well tolerated. It's been used in America for some time now. And I've prescribed it through my menopause center, and I have to say, everybody I've given it to has said that literally overnight it switched their hot flushes off. And so if you've got a load of symptoms related to your hot flushes and night sweats, if taking Veosa means that you can get a night's sleep, then you might find that some of the cognition, so memory issues, etc., and sleepiness, mood issues during the day can be helped too. It's well tolerated. There is a minute risk of abnormal liver function test with it. So we're checking liver function as a baseline first, particularly if you've had a history of abnormal liver function in the past. And I think the side effects listed are abdominal pain. It does list sleep disturbance, but I haven't seen that in practice, and headaches, which again, I haven't seen in practice. So in terms of whether you can get it through the NHS, if you've got a doctor who's comfortable with it. So for example, if you go and see a menopause specialist through the NHS, and they're able to issue a private prescription for you to source, then you may be able to get it through an NHS clinic, but it just depends on the level of training and comfort of that doctor that you're seeing. Otherwise, unfortunately, it is privately. So yeah, so watch this space. I think it's a really good drug. You can
Excellent.
take it if you've had treatment for breast cancer. It hasn't got a license for use in women who've had breast cancer, but it doesn't affect your hormone levels. And so we are at the moment saying you can have it if you've been through your treatment for breast cancer. So hopefully that answers all the questions on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah.
And I know this isn't quite a prescribable alternative, but seeing as vaginal issues, vaginal dryness and pain came up, what would you recommend for from a HRT perspective for managing vaginal issues?
Yeah. Okay, so vaginal issues, so alternatives, obviously vaginal lubricants, vaginal moisturizers, and just make sure that they are designed for female bodies. So for example, there are many out there, but the Yes brand is a good brand. You could include vaginal estrogens, not as HRT in a way, because when you use a vaginal estrogen, you hardly absorb any of it into your body. So if you have had breast cancer, it's really likely that even if it was hormone positive breast cancer, the research indicates that you can use a vaginal estrogen. The only word of caution is if you're taking aromatase inhibitors like anastrozole, letrozole, for example, it may need a tiny bit of a discussion with your oncologist. But it looks that the issue is there just isn't the data supporting safety, but they probably are. They just need a tiny bit more of a word of caution. But if you've had breast cancer, if you finish your treatment, if you've had breast cancer, you're on tamoxifen, you can use a vaginal estrogen if you feel comfortable doing so.
Excellent, thank you. And I think as ever, Claire, you'd say don't be shy and don't be too embarrassed to speak to your GP about this.
Oh yeah, no, don't. And if the GP says no, you can't have one because you've had breast cancer, just point them in the direction of the new NICE guideline, because it really does open the door for GPs to prescribing vaginal estrogens following breast cancer.
Brilliant, thank you. So just so everybody knows, I've put a link in on a patient information leaflet on Veosa that Claire wrote, and I've just put a link in to an article that Claire wrote about HRT, but pointing to the section on topical vaginal estrogen. So in case anyone wants to follow up some more. Claire, just thinking more generally about some of the other prescribable alternatives and the symptoms they can help with, what are the key ones?
Yeah, okay, so whizzing through really briefly. So all of the SSRI and SNRI types of antidepressants can also help manage hot flushes and night sweats, as well as psychological symptoms of the menopause. You do have to be wary with some of them that can interact with tamoxifen. And I'll pop up, when we hand back to Melinda, I'll put some links in the chat. There's a really useful table that we've got that highlights those. Gabapentin off-license use can help sleep, and again, a bit like some of the herbs, plugs the GABA receptors, so can help with anxiety, can help aches and pains. This is off-license use though, and you do have to be careful about stopping gabapentin slowly once you're on it. Clonidine is licensed for vasomotor symptoms, hot flushes, night sweats. It's a blood pressure tablet. In my experience, women commonly get dry mouth and feel a bit dizzy, but it can help take the edge off hot flushes and night sweats. And oxybutynin is a tablet that we use for bladder irritability. And again, there's some data that's emerging initially from Australia, actually, showing that it can help manage vasomotor symptoms. So quick whistle-stop tour, and I'm going to put a link in the chat to further information on those. But don't rule out, if you're really struggling, do not rule out antidepressants, because they can help hot flushes as well. So often there's a lot of fear, which is right, but you know, they can have side effects, but don't rule them out.
And Claire, before we come back to Melissa and or Melinda, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look through the many questions that will be there. We'll come through them. We've got a question here about whether or not the use of castor oil for vaginal use.
Oh, castor oil for vaginal use. I haven't been asked about that before. I can't see that it would be an issue. Melinda, do you have any insight into that? It'll be a lubricant. And it's oily, greasy, so it probably decreases friction. I can't think it would be an issue, but Melinda, any thoughts?
I would say there's no harm in using it. It wouldn't be sort of the first thing I would go for, but I can't see that it would be detrimental.
Lots of women I talk to use coconut oil, and you just have to be careful with some of the carriers in some of the oils, because if you've got really delicate, sensitive skin, sometimes that can mean that, so particularly if it's perfumed, it can lead to more sensitivity. You're often better going really basic initially, just pure grease.
Brilliant,
like
thank you, Claire.
Hydromol, Epiderm, for example, you know, they can be useful.
Melinda, do you want to take the questions in order that you feel is best?
Well, a few people have asked about, you know, obviously I've talked about a lot of different herbs this evening, and a few people have asked, you know, what do we do? Do we take them all in one go? And so if you go to my website and download this guide I've created for you, it talks about how to start taking herbal medicines. And I mean, when I prescribe herbal medicines, I do prescribe 6, 7, or even 8 different liquid plant medicines mixed together, because I want to hit lots of different targets all at once. But if you're just starting out, my advice is just to take one thing at a time. And that goes for supplements as well, because you need to know what they're doing. You know, how do they feel in your body? How, you know, what effect are they having? And if you throw too many things at your body at once, it can get very overloaded, and it can sometimes be really difficult for your liver as well to process too many supplements, and you might be taking some other medication as well. So just take it really gently and slowly, and just try one thing at a time. There are some good blended supplements out there. So Wild Nutrition have a good blended menopause supplement, and Dr. Vegan actually have a really nice blended menopause supplement that has lots of different herbs and vitamins and minerals in it. So just take it slowly, and don't get overwhelmed by everything. Just think about what is, you know, if you've got one particular symptom that you want to target, then just look at what herbs might be useful for that and try that first.
And then I know we'd other questions in there, Melinda. How do you know what dose to take? And I guess another question then is, how long should you wait before you can expect to see a difference?
Yeah, so really varies depending on the herbs. So for something like skullcap, which is really calming, you would get an immediate effect from that. So just from having the tincture or drinking a cup of skullcap tea, you would really feel a lot calmer. Just as if you were having a cup of chamomile tea, you know that you feel much calmer straight away. But then for other herbs, especially the hormonal herbs, they will take a little bit longer to work, because hormones are tricky things and they need a little bit more time to balance out. So you know, for sometimes when I'm working with people, you know, depending where in their cycle they start taking the herbs, you know, they may not see an effect by the next time they have a period, but then by the next time, you go through the next cycle, and then you start to see an effect then. So that can take a bit longer. And as I said, with black cohosh for hot sweats, night sweats and hot flushes, you know, probably around about 7 to 14 days, you'll see a result with the hot flushes really reducing. And just with the question about dosages, it's a really complicated issue. I mean, I trained for 8 years to learn about all the different doses that, you know, for all the different herbal medicines. You know, but when you buy a herbal supplement, it will say, you know, on the label what you know, what you should be taking. But with black cohosh, for example, you're looking at a minimum of 40 milligrams a day to get a result. You know, and it varies very much depending on the herb. You know, if you're taking it as a herbal tea, then to get a really good effect from a herbal tea, you really should be using loose leaf tea rather than a tea bag, and let it brew for, you know, a good sort of 5 to 10 minutes, get a really good strong cup of herbal tea. You know, because this is the thing that really upsets me, is that lots of people try herbal medicines and it doesn't work, or it's not strong enough, or it's a rubbish supplement, and they throw it all in the bin and waste their money, and then they think all herbs don't work, and that's just not the case.
Really sound advice there. And then, Melinda, are you comfortable answering a question about a specific brand? So if you're not, that I understand, that's fine. But one of our audience members have asked about your view on menopause supplements.
Don't use them. That's all I'll
Okay.
say. Don't recommend
you.
them. Don't use them.
Okay.
And also, there's a few people who've put in quite, you know, complicated, you know, they're struggling with a lot of complicated issues here. And I just like to say that I do offer a free 30-minute phone call that you can book through my website if anyone wants to get in touch and talk through some of the more complicated conditions that they're dealing with.
Thank you. And as I said, Melinda, that's a very generous thing that you do there. And that's all that I put the link into your website. I'll put it in the newsletter as well, so people can find you that way, because we do these events to help women who are struggling with symptoms and aren't sure where to go to. And we can't always get to everyone's questions. So that's a fantastic resource that you're also offering. And based on the conversation tonight, I'm sure you'll have people beating down your door to book those appointments, Melinda. Clare, last few questions for you before we wrap up and hand back to AD, because unbelievably the hour is almost up. So, and actually one interesting question for both of you, we actually haven't had this question ever before, but it's the products that we recommended for hot flushes. Can they be taken by men who have hot flushes as well?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, it's probably, so I'm wondering if we're thinking about men who are on, say, treatment for prostate cancer that are blocking hormones. And so hot flushes would be probably generated by the loss of, it would still be loss of estrogen on the brain. They won't, the thing is, there won't be any research into this. You always have to go back to that. Are you going to cause harm? And I think it depends why they've got the hot flushes, because you can get